Amen, amen. I agree with everything that you said. To touch on it, you know, when I first presented this topic to the AY team, I knew it was a bit controversial, but to be honest, it was something that I had discussed with friends who also live stream and watch the program. But to be honest, it was for me because I have struggled with not only porn addiction but lust since before I could even remember. And I had notes that I had written down, but I was going to disregard those notes because, I want to be as open and transparent as possible. I'm not going to sit before the congregation in the church and pretend like I'm holier than thou. I do still uh, struggle with certain things. I've never had an issue with alcohol or drugs or homosexuality or any of those things, but lust and porn addiction is just as bad, if not worse, than some of those other addictions and strongholds. And so, you know, I noticed because I was thinking about, my earlier years of my upbringing. My mother did a really good job of trying to shield me from pornography and things of that nature. And I was exposed to it early when I was in fifth grade. I was 10 years old. And we had someone, I would go over to a babysitter's house because while my mother was working because she was a single mother. And her nephew, who was younger than me, would turn on, would pop in the tape or flick to, and that's back when you had, the little channels that you could just cable. And, even at an innocent age, I was like, oh, no, I would shield my eyes and turn away, like, what are you doing? And, but as I got older, not so innocent anymore. And that's when I became exposed. By the time I was in sixth grade and peer pressure hit, um, I went to public school. Friends were talking about, lust and things of that nature and things of the opposite sex. And I'm trying to be as PG as possible. But, you know, and like, I had no idea what they were talking about, but, I just pretend because I didn't want to pretend like, I wasn't up to date with the topic. I would just, go along. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. Yeah, not knowing anything. So that's sixth grade. By the time eighth grade hit, I was full blown into it. I would wait until 12 o'clock when the HBO stuff would come on, and when mommy was asleep, turn it down. You know what I mean? So it wouldn't be too loud to wake up. And I can confess that now. I wasn't gonna confess that when I was younger, but you know what I mean. And so that's where it all. And I even noticed because growing up, and my mother could even attest to this. Growing up, I was always attracted to godly women. Women who dressed modestly, who wasn't promiscuous, didn't put themselves out there. But even after being exposed to pornography and lust of that nature, the type of women that I started becoming attracted to were no longer godly women. They were more out there worldly women. And I noticed that, and I was like, okay, this is a change. Something's happening here. And so, you know, uh, it just goes to show, like, you know, I always wanted to wait until I was married in order, to be intimate with a woman. That was what I was taught. That's what my mother taught me. That was her hope for me, and that was my hope for myself. And then, the teenage years hit, and that went out the window. And so, you know, it's been a struggle, and it gotten really bad, especially in my teenage years and in my early 20s and even into my early 30s. It was like it was bad because it's like you couldn't even um, concentrate. Like the gentleman said, when you're supposed to be focusing on school and things of that nature, you're too busy focusing on other things. I had a female tutor who was trying to study with me so that I can get good grades, and all I could think about was what was under her skirt, and it's bad. It ashames me to say that, but I'm only being transparent because I want people who are watching and people who are listening to know that you are not alone. I'm being real with you. I'm not gonna put on a facade. This is truly 100% things that I had to endure, and so you know, it was one of those things where it's a lot easier now because I am studying and I am, I have the Lord on my mind. It's a lot easier now than it was back then, but you know, it was one of those things, and it's also too, it's a worldly thing. It's what the world promotes. They have a quote, sex sales and things of this nature, and pretty much if you're not indulging in it, you're pretty much the oddball or the odd man out, or you know what I mean. And so, with that being said, because I have a weird habit of being a people pleaser and I want everyone to like me, I would just go along with it, like, oh yeah, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and that was me fighting my moral compass, knowing that it was wrong, knowing that what I was indulging in was not healthy. One of the things I had, a gentleman asked me a question. He was a religious leader, and this was years ago. And he said, if there was one thing that would keep you out of the kingdom of heaven, what would it be? And I thought about it, and I said, well, I don't try to hurt people. I'm not a thief. I don't steal. I don't lie. It was definitely not just pornography, but just impure thoughts and lust of that nature. And that was one of my biggest fears growing up, when I was earlier in my Christian walk, knowing that, okay, this lust and, these improper thoughts are going to be the downfall of me. And that was like my hugest fear, And so I'm here to tell you there is a good, happy ending. And that is that when you put Christ first and you study your word and you grow closer to God, those things start to slowly eliminate. I can remember being in my 20s, and me and my son's mother had just broke up, and I was like, very, very lustful and out there. And, now here I am, 36 years of age, and it's not that important. It's like a switch went off where it's like, and that's not to say that I still struggle. Like every addiction, you have to take it one day at a time when in recovery. But what I will honestly say is if you put God first, He will make it to where whatever it is you're going through and you're battling through will just be a thing of the past. And I'm going to end it on that note. Amen.
Amen.